Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our final Motivation Monday for 2020. And what a year it's been, and how much have we really needed that Monday motivation. We had so many fantastic sessions over the year, and it's great to have you all with us and join today. Today we have John Stapleton, who famously started the new Covent Garden Soup Company, had that crazy idea of why should soup be in a tin? And look where we've got to now. Obviously, he's gone on to start other businesses, support many others. Intrepid entrepreneur, taking all the risks. I presume also taking a few of the hits along the way. But that's what we've come to hear all about. His subject, turning uncertainty into competitive advantage. So happy to pass over to you, John Stapleton.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Very kind. I've always said that I've learned more useful business stuff as a 6-year-old than I did at any point since. In fact, I'm convinced I learned more useful business stuff as a 6-year-old than I did at any point since. I grew up in the west of Ireland in the 70s. My dad had a beef farm, and that means really he grew beef. He had lots of cows, and once a cow had a calf, 2 to 4 weeks later, he would buy in some extra calves and match them up with what he used to call a surrogate cow. Yeah. And this usually meant that each cow could rear 2 or maybe 3 calves at a time. And once the calves had grown up, my dad would sell them all then at the age of 2. And these cows were the first step for the revenue stream for the farm. And selling the grown-up cattle was what sustained the family and what paid the bills. And this was the business model that kept the family going. And there were 6 of us, by the way, my mom and my dad and 2 boys and 2 girls. I'm the eldest. And I suppose you could say it was quite a modest setup. As you can imagine, there were lots of working capital tied up in the calf herd until they grew up, and then you could get to sell them 2 years later. But it worked quite well, so long as you kept the cycle moving. And I really enjoyed my childhood on the farm. I was on my own for the first 6 years because my siblings all arrived after that. But I enjoyed those days very much, especially the long, hot summers. Now I know, don't laugh, but we had long, hot summers even in Ireland. But at least that's what I remember most about my early childhood. But let me take you to one special summer, one day, summer 1970. I was 6. On a particular day in that summer of 1970 that I remember really well. And it's one of the most vivid memories from back then, probably actually one of my earliest memories. So I'm standing in a field of lush green grass. I'm standing there in my short trousers and oversized Wellington boots. And the field I'm standing in is one of those fields quite close to the farmhouse. It's one of the fields where my dad kept the calves when they were very young. And it's a field I've been in many, many times, sometimes on my own. But this time I'm there with my dad. And my dad had taken me there, and even as he held my hand walking towards the field, I got a kind of a sense that something wasn't quite right. And that was because my dad used to whistle a lot when he walked the farm. At this time, there was no whistling. There was sort of a dark expression on his face, but I didn't really understand why. But as the 2 of us got closer and closer and then further into the field, it became more apparent that something was definitely not right. So the field was full of calves, certainly, but this time something is horribly wrong. As we walked deeper into the field, all we could hear was nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing but silence. And something more unusual, in fact, there was no movement. The calves at this age are normally frolicking about, chasing each other all over the place. And instead it was just this kind of deadly, motionless silence. Now, the field is full of calves, certainly, and they're all around me. But the problem is, many of them are dead. And the rest of them are slowly dying. So I'm standing there, 6 years old, surrounded by all of this death. I could smell it. In fact, I can still smell it today when I remember this story. This death hanging in the warm, clammy air. And some of the calves are very obviously dead. Like they're blown up carcasses, upended, lying rigid, and their legs sticking out, pointing in all sorts of directions. And some are obviously in distress and are in pain. And most of them have flies crawling around their eyes and their noses. And I could not believe it. I certainly couldn't understand it. It was a terrible scene, and a very unfamiliar scene. And what seemed even worse about it was happening in a place that was normally so familiar to me. It was happening in a place that I called home. Now it didn't seem like home anymore. It seemed like this kind of an alien place where something terrifying was going on. And when I look back on it, to a certain extent, there's a feeling of lost innocence about this whole experience. I'm frightened, I'm sad, I'm confused. It was a lot to take in for a little boy of 6, faced with this horror and fear and distress. And I'm not sure if I've ever felt those emotions before. I was very unsure what they meant. For me, it looked like and it felt like what a catastrophe must feel like. For me, it felt like our world was caving in. And I was thinking, what's happened here? Like what's caused this? And who's to blame for this? And what have we done wrong to deserve this? And I guess I was too young to comprehend everything that was going on, but I was old enough to recognize this was going to end badly. And I looked at my dad, and I could only think it was going to end badly for all of us. But you know what? As I watched how my dad reacted to this catastrophe, I'll always remember what he said. He simply said, "John, don't worry about this. This sort of stuff happens, and it's not nice, but it's going to be all right. We'll get some more calves." And in that moment, it dawned on me: you can work hard, you can be as prepared as you like, you can do all the right stuff, not leave anything to chance, but there are no guarantees. You can never really be that certain about anything in life. And this is the first time I can remember realizing this, but I realized that bad stuff can happen. In fact, bad stuff happens all the time. And when bad stuff happens, it can feel like it's so unfair. And when something happens that we feel is unfair, we immediately realize it can happen again. And that can be really scary. But actually, when you think about it, isn't that just normal? We can't ever be sure about everything. We can't predict everything. We can't be certain about everything. So in actual fact, we're much better accepting that this is the case and living with it. Living with and accepting the uncertainty. My dad didn't preoccupy himself with thoughts of why me and what have I done to deserve this and thinking, life is so unfair. He didn't do unfair. He didn't do self-pity. Now, I could tell, obviously, he was very upset at the calves dying, but he didn't seem to have any of the blind fear that I certainly had. He actually seemed to take it in his stride. His attitude was more like, this certainly isn't good, but it's happened now. We can't undo it. We just need to figure out what we need to do next. We'll work out a plan, and it's obviously going to be tough for a while, but we'll get through this. And you know what? He actually seemed to personify to me the acceptance of how uncertain life can be. And it was only many years later that I realized, my dad clearly brought me into that field on purpose. I guess so I could, experience this gritty situation for myself. And I can't believe it was orchestrated in any way, but he clearly thought I should be part of it. I guess he believed some good would come of it. And he was absolutely right. What I got out of it was to realize not only that bad stuff happens, but in fact, it was probably going to happen anyway, irrespective of anything I did. Life's just not that predictable, no matter what I might do to make it that way. Life is a series of uncertainties, and we need to live with those uncertainties. So way back at the tender age of 6, I had this realization that apparently bad stuff can happen, and that life was uncertain, no matter what you did to try to make it otherwise. But in hindsight, when I think about it more, I now see this realization more like a liberation. Yeah, it was a liberation because I realized none of this stuff, the bad stuff, was any of my fault. It was very likely going to happen anyway. And that allowed me not to take the bad stuff personally. That freed me up to put most of my energy into dealing with the uncertainty when it happened, and not to try to prevent it from happening or hoping it wouldn't happen or then getting mad when it did happen. So the lesson here for me, from when I was 6, is why I'm convinced I learned more useful business stuff at the age of 6 than I did at any other stage since. And that's because life is full of uncertainty. And business life is even more cram-packed with uncertainty. And an entrepreneurial business life is almost defined by uncertainty. In an entrepreneurial world, we're busy crashing through walls and uprooting trees and being disruptive. We're constantly challenging the norm, doing things differently. When you think about it, though, we're putting ourselves in the way of challenges or setbacks or adversity all the time. So it stands to reason that we will be surrounded by uncertainty, possibly even more so than in other walks of life. A few years back, I used to speak about the business uncertainty surrounding Brexit, both from a British and a European perspective. And only just last year, it felt like the most uncertain, all-encompassing risk we faced as an industry or as a community or as a nation was Brexit. Now, clearly lots of opportunity exists also, but risk, and definitely lots of uncertainties. But all of this was thrown abruptly to one side by the COVID pandemic. COVID didn't build up over time. It was incredibly sudden. It wasn't, confined to the UK or even to Europe. It was global. It wasn't an industry-specific issue. It affected all industries alike. And more so than any of those things, COVID implied death. So it was very, very emotional, and it led to panic. And it's not over yet. It's still with us. But if Brexit was defined by uncertainty, it seems as if COVID has been uncertainty to the power of 100. But just like any other form of uncertainty, we need to find a way to live with it. We need to find a way to manage it. We need to find a way to deal with it. In 1987, 17 years after all those calves dying, we set up New Covent Garden Soup Company. We were told it couldn't be done. All the experts told us it couldn't be done. Not only could it not be done, but if we dared try, we would end up killing somebody. That's right. The science experts told us you will kill someone. Liquid soup needs to be sterilized. That's why it's already in a can. You have to therefore put liquid soup in a can. And other experts told us, even if you did try to do this, consumers would never find it in the supermarket. If people want soup, what do? They go down the soup aisle. They never expect to find soup in the chiller. And yet more experts said, soup doesn't belong in a carton. It's all wrong. Milk goes in a carton. That's what the experts told us. Did we listen? No. Well, of course we didn't. We knew better. Even though, to be honest, we didn't really. In summer 1987, I met a guy called Andrew Palmer. It was Andrew's brainchild to bring fresh soup to the market. And we decided to do it together. We didn't really know what we were in for, but we set about proving our idea the only way we knew how, by doing it. Now, to be fair, back in 1987, all liquid soup was in a can. And it's been that way for over 100 years. Your parents bought soup in a can, and their parents bought soup in a can. And to be honest, their parents also bought soup in a can. That was the convention of the time. That was a conventional wisdom. But we didn't want it in a can. We wanted it in something that made it fresh. We didn't want it in a can because by putting it in a can, you need to cook the living daylights out of it. So you can sterilize it and make sure it lasts for up to 18 months. That's all right, but it kills nutrition and it completely changes the flavor. We didn't want the product to taste of the process used to give it a really long shelf life. We wanted the product to, funnily enough, taste of the fresh ingredients we used to make it in the first place. We wanted to have a fresh soup process. So the theory was great, but we needed a practical solution. We thought, how difficult can it be? Lots of people already put milk in cartons. It shouldn't be too tricky putting soup in cartons. How wrong we were. We spent 18 months trying to get soup into cartons like this. I kid you not. We chose the carton because it screamed fresh. And ultimately this carton, became our biggest asset. But it was also our biggest challenge. Carton filling machines, machines used to fill stuff into cartons like this, were designed to fill milk and juice back in the late 80s. And those products are completely liquid. There aren't any bits in them. And soup, as you know, a lot of time has bits in it, quite often large bits. And consumers really like bits. In fact, the more bits and the bigger the bits, the better. So think about this for a minute. Imagine what a soup factory might look like. There's basically 3 stages to a food factory or to a soup factory. There's cooking, and then there's filling, and then there's cooling. So we cook the soup in these large vessels here, let's say, and then we pump the soup into the carton filler here in the middle. And then, by the way, it was filled hot, so we needed to cool it down really quickly. So then it was sent on to a chiller. That was over there. And our challenge, very simply, was to redesign the carton filler, the bit in the middle. Easier said than done. Like I say, the carton filler was originally designed to fill cold milk. We needed to come up with something that filled hot liquids with bits floating about in it, something which was never done before. And this bit turned out to be the major challenge. The way I tend to explain it really is if you got a bucket of water, right, which has 4 marbles at the bottom, a bucket full of water with 4 marbles in it, and you want to pour the water in your bucket into 4 separate egg cups, so that each egg cup is full of water, and each egg cup has 1 marble each. And the water is boiling hot. You don't want to spill any if you possibly can. And you need to do it all as quickly as possible because you're in a factory environment. A ludicrous idea, right? I mean, were we mad? I'm not sure what possessed us to think that this was a good thing to try and ever make work. And believe me, over these 18 months, there were many, many days when we had soup on the ceiling and soup on the walls and soup on the floor and no soup in the bloody carton. I remember those days. I used to come home stinking of onions and garlic. I think all soup we made at those days started off with onions and garlic and olive oil. But you know, my social life took a huge backseat in the late 80s, thinking of onions and garlic one day and covered from head to toe in crusty soup the next, and looking like the soup monster the next day. So we made a go of it. Although, you know, those early days were fun, there were many moments when it really looked like it wasn't going to work. I felt like at times, you know, the problems had become insurmountable. But we kept on going. We worked day and night trying to get the bloody pieces of vegetable and chicken floating about in hot liquid into our cartons. The entire process was almost impossible to get right. Almost. Eventually, after 18 months of trial and error under our belt, with lots and lots of dead ends, many of them incredibly frustrating, we eventually ended up with a process which we found was going to work. We added in some IP we figured out along the way, and we even patented the process because it was a novel process and nobody was doing it. And during all this time, during this whole 18 months, I kept thinking, what we need really is to find an experienced technologist or an experienced industrialist who can show us how to do all this, or even better, do it for us. And having searched high and low for this person, right at the end, when we're almost getting to a conclusion, we eventually found him. Can you think who he might have been? Exactly. He was with us all along, and it was me. The closest thing to an expert that existed in this field anywhere, actually, was me. No one really knew more about what we were trying to achieve, by definition, than I did. And anyway, when you think about it, I don't think we really needed an expert. After all those experts told us it couldn't be done. Remember the scientists who told us, you'll kill somebody. Liquid soup needs to be sterilized. That's why it's in a can. Now, of course, we absolutely needed to make sure that the process was going to be safe and not going to make anybody ill, never mind kill anybody. So we definitely made sure we sorted that bit out. But wasn't it interesting that the starting point for so many so-called experts was your crazy idea will not work? And in our case, putting liquid in something other than a can would be a disaster. And in hindsight, I would go as far to say, if there was just one thing, and there's always many things, but if there was just one thing we did to make New Covent Garden Soup Company successful, it was putting the soup in a carton. And remember the other experts who told us that consumers wouldn't find it on the shelf anyway, even if we did put it on the shelf. They'll go down the soup aisle. It's called the soup aisle if they want soup. They won't expect to find it in the chiller. Well, in actual fact, consumers loved the idea of finding soup in the chiller, because being in the chiller meant it was fresh, and it reminded them of this because it tasted of the fresh ingredients used to make it. And The other experts who then said, soup doesn't belong in a carton. It's all wrong. Milk goes in a carton. Soup, that's not what a carton's for. But of course, consumers love the carton too. So much so, in the early 90s, consumers actually believed fresh soup only came in a carton. We were the only fresh soup available. And by the way, when the big retailers launched their own version of fresh soup, and ultimately all of them did, the last thing they wanted to do was put their fresh soup in was a carton because we owned the carton. It was like New Covent Garden Soup Company territory. The carton had become synonymous with the New Covent Garden Soup Company brand. Remember that the carton spoke freshness, and the consumer identified with this. So the retailers and the other brands that launched fresh soup after us, they had to find a way around this. So they all put soup in plastic tubs or pouches, and that's how it's remained to this very day. So the carton, our biggest challenge, ultimately became our greatest asset. And also, I think that's one of the great differences between an expert and an entrepreneur. An expert tells you, sorry, mate, that won't work. And here's 20 reasons, by the way, why it won't work. An entrepreneur tells you, let me show you how it will work. And in effect, these so-called expert views is what I call the conventional wisdom of the day. And my experience is much more to do about convention and not a lot to do about wisdom. But it can be either a brave or a foolish decision to decide I'm going to do all this myself when nobody's ever done it before. When the experts are telling you you're crazy, and actually, to be honest, you're really telling yourself you're crazy because you're ankle deep in soup one day and absolutely nothing is working the next. And all the while, that little bit of money that you had raised to get you started is running out. But to be honest, it's moments like these you need to have the courage of your convictions. Your conviction is about not listening to the conventional wisdom, but doing it in a different way. And your courage is to trust yourself to get on with doing the difficult stuff yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, by the way, that my message is not about debunking experts. I'm not being Michael Gove and suggesting we don't need experts. We often do need experts. Expertise can, in the right situation, be a huge asset. On the contrary, my message is in business, it's not about finding an expert to do the stuff that hasn't been done before, because really, an expert is an expert in stuff that already has been done before. That's how they got to be an expert. I obviously learned a hell of a lot from New Covent Garden Soup Company. About filling soup into cartons, certainly, and about how to make things happen in the food industry, for sure, and about business, of course. But I also learned, and it was definitely an even more important lesson, I believe. I realized it's down to you and down to you alone to have the courage of your convictions. So why am I talking about stuff like my dad's calves dying in a field when I was 6 and stuff like that? Well, from my point of view, this highlighted to me the setbacks that can happen, but that's only because life is full of uncertainty. And we need to not fight this, but instead accept it and focus on dealing with the outcome of the uncertainty. And what was that bit about the struggle about getting soup in a carton? It seemed like a very specific story, but it's obviously all about having the courage of your convictions. The conviction that you are right, despite people queuing around the block, it seems at times, to tell you that you're wrong, and the courage to do the stuff yourself that has never been done before. And to be honest, all of this made me realize whatever success I might have had later in life, it's in no small way or no small part due to the experiences I had when cows were dying in the field when I was 6. And as it turned out, before I ever encountered the setbacks or the roadblocks and the adversity, I guess, of setting up and growing New Covent Garden, and that filling soup into the carton was only the beginning of it. But I was already well equipped to deal with all those things because of what I learned all those years ago as a kid. And I guess that's the essence of being an entrepreneur, although, of course, I didn't realize it at the time. But when we think about it, an entrepreneur, I'm convinced, needs to do more than that. To my mind, an entrepreneur needs to not only live with uncertainty, but also turn that uncertainty into a competitive advantage. Now, this at first might seem like, a bit counterintuitive, but it's not. Entrepreneurs know this, and the successful ones practice it. Within every uncertainty lies opportunity. Small, agile companies can capitalize on this. Large companies have more difficulty with this because it's, they prefer the status quo and they're very good at managing the status quo. But smaller companies are more agile. And uncertainty means change, and change means a new way of doing things. And to the keen business eye, this presents an opportunity. And when have we ever lived through more uncertain times than today? 2020 can almost be defined by uncertainty. And good question, is 2021 unlikely to be any less certain? I mean, we have a vaccine now, and maybe some things are a little clearer compared to back in March and April. But there are a lot of questions still answered. There are a lot of fundamental questions left unanswered. We're all facing uncertainty regarding things like, our customers and our business and our whatever category we're in, our industry, and other industries on which we perhaps rely. And this pandemic, it's not like a normal trend or a typical business evolution. These sort of things happen gradually, whereas this pandemic has happened very suddenly, and it's happened to everybody all at the same time. Entrepreneurs are really good at identifying opportunity in uncertainty, and then turning that uncertainty into a competitive advantage. People, meaning consumers and customers, are clearly looking forward to a return to their routines and to their favorites. But I'm convinced there'll be what I call some degree of stickability. Yeah, people will take some of the experiences of the last 9 months with them into the future. Consumer behavior will change. There's a few examples I can think of. Purchasing online becoming incredibly popular, dramatically increased. And many people are working from home and have been doing so for almost 9 months now. And many of those have come to like it, and productivity has been shown to increase in many cases. And business meetings, are being mostly held on web conference. We're holding this speaking event remotely, whereas before we might all have been in the same room together. And business travel has significantly reduced. People are questioning why they now need to fly to New York for that monthly review. Maybe once a quarter is enough, or once a year. All the other ones we can have online. And I'm sure the types of homes we want to live in the future will change if many is continuing to work from home, or at least in part work from home. If one room in your house needs to be dedicated as an office in the future, this surely will have an effect on the design and the space allocation of our homes, or of our, call it, work-life spaces. And the smart entrepreneurs will observe these changes. They will reposition their business or even pivot their existing business to be at the front of the pack to capitalize on this shift in consumer behavior. Remember those empty shelves we had back in March and April? Many believed at the time that this was due to panic buying. And of course, we did have some panic buying with toilet paper and cleaning agents and stuff like that. But the majority of these out of stocks were due to everybody adjusting their purchasing pattern, just ever so slightly. Everybody was buying just a few more items when they visited the store each time. And if every shopping trolley has a few more items in it, guess what? Then that, the finely tuned stock replenishment system that the retailers have, the grocery chains have, is going to be caught out. And the result is empty shelves. And the point is, this may only be a 5% change, but if everyone is doing it, if everyone is making this change, then that will result in a significant shift in consumer behavior. And the businesses who notice this kind of thing and figure this out for their particular industry are the ones who are going to be well situated to drive an advantage from the current uncertainty. And a further thing, the really successful businesses are those who understand the benefit of not only delivering an advantage from uncertainty, but work on delivering a competitive advantage. You remember that old joke about the lions on the Serengeti plain? Yeah, one of Billy Connolly's favorite jokes. Let me remind you, because I think it makes a point here. There's a pair of journalists, right? And they're filming the lions on the Serengeti plain. They have their cameras out on the tripod, and they're far enough away from the lions, not to bother them. But gradually, the wind changes, and the lions pick up their scent. And as the lions gradually meander in the direction of the cameraman, they begin to pick up a little bit of pace. They begin to get into a jog. And one cameraman, slips off his shoes and slips on a pair of Nikes. And the other cameraman looks at him and goes, "You don't think you're going to outrun a lion in those, do you?" And the guy in the Nikes goes, "I'm not really that concerned about the lions. All I know is I'm going to outrun you." And yeah, it's a bit of a joke, of course, but there's a lot of truth in it. This is the point, really, is you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be better than your competition. You don't need to outrun a line, you just need to outrun your competition. You need to be better than your competition who haven't figured out yet what the 5% shift in their customers' behavior is or is likely to be. And they're still trying to make an outdated business model work, a business model or a strategy which is more suited to pre-COVID times. And you are focusing on the future, on what will make a difference, perhaps a huge difference. In any event, smart business leaders recognize the opportunity in uncertainty. And if it really is the case that we've never lived through more uncertainty than we have today, then even smarter business leaders know there's never been more opportunity than there is today. You just need to look in the right place. You need to turn your uncertainty into your competitive advantage. Thank you very much.
The famous thing, you're on mute. I love it. That's been my best phrase of this season. So thank you again, John. Absolutely brilliant. I love that. Life is a series of uncertainties, and couldn't agree with you.